We'll rebuild it. Isn't that our history? For thousands of years, we've been on the verge of extinction. And for thousands of years, we have survived. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mandalorthodox, a panel discussion on Jewish history and modern practice in the Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian. My name is Michal Schick. I'm a television writer, podcaster, and general nerd, and I will be your host for this discussion. Just a couple things to note before we get started. First, this is an all-spoiler discussion, so anything related to Star Wars is fair game, though obviously our focus will mainly be on The Mandalorian, as well as parts of the Book of Boba Fett, the Clone Wars, and Star Wars Rebels animated series. Second, this panel will be recorded and up on YouTube, I guess probably until their servers die, so do continue to share it and spread the word about our discussion today. Thirdly, we will not be able to cover everything Jewish in The Mandalorian at all, even close. We hope that this panel can be part of the ongoing analysis of Jewish storytelling, both in Star Wars and in speculative fiction in general. And we really encourage you to continue the discussion on social media and other forums. You can also talk to real people in your life about it. That happens sometimes. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, I am thrilled to introduce our wonderful panelists. We're all going to share something about who they are, where they've come from, and their Star Wars backgrounds. So let's start with Tamar.
Am I supposed to introduce myself? I thought you were going to introduce us.
No, it's up to you, kid.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tamar Herman. I am a journalist who covers mostly music and entertainment business, focused primarily on international markets, especially K-pop. I'm the author of the book BTS Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and featured in several K-pop documentaries. You can follow me at Tamar Writes on Twitter if it still exists. Or I recently started the Substack Notes on K-pop, so you can go check me out there, and I update all my work if you're interested. I think I was born a nerd. I co-host the Nice Jewish Fangirls podcast with Michal, which has always been fun, but the first Star Wars memory that I have was very traumatic, and it was my dad taking us to go see A New Hope when it was in theaters when I was a kid. And I don't remember anything else. I just remember the skeletons of Owen and Beru. Like, that is scarred into my brain. I remember being scared at other parts of the movie. I was like 5, but I just remember the skeletons. I very distinctly had that image in my head, and I didn't know until like years later, because I never watched A New Hope again. I refused. I was obsessed with Return of the Jedi, but never A New Hope. And then I like Googled it one day. I was like, oh no, I remember that image perfectly. So that was my Star Wars origin, and I still liked it even though I was scarred.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's where most fandom comes from, a mix of trauma and love. Speaking of, next we have Jenn.
Hi, everybody. I am Jenn Levine. I'm a writer, producer, and development executive. I have loved Star Wars basically since before I was born. As family lore tells it, my parents went to see it opening weekend when she was pregnant with me, and having never made such a racket before, I kicked the entire time, and I still kick pretty wildly for all things Star Wars to this day.
Awesome. Next we have Akiva.
All right. Hi, I'm Akiva. I'm a teacher of Torah. I currently live in Memphis, Tennessee, where I teach at Born Bloom Jewish Community Day School. My Star Wars background, when I was like 5 or 6, Star Wars was like the thing that everybody in my class talked about, and I became an expert on it despite not having seen it. And finally I unearthed like the Return of the Jedi VHS that my parents had, and was like, oh yeah, this fits with all the things that I've been told, but what happened before that? I don't know. I had to wait until it like came out in like the trilogy form, whatever. Yeah, so I've since the beginning, I've known a lot more about Star Wars than I've actually seen. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, who among us hasn't been like, I know that because I read the wiki. And finally we have Alex.
Okay. Hello, I'm Alex Zeldin. I'm a columnist for The Forward. I'm based out of New York. You can see my lovely apartment behind me. My start with Star Wars is kind of a mixed one. Probably pretty related to the Mandalorian series. I had the privilege when I was a kid of seeing the original trilogy re-released in theaters and loved it. But I had the same relationship to Star Wars with like any other sci-fi of it's just fun and weird and interesting. And I didn't really delve that far into it until COVID hit. And then I was stuck indoors for months on end, not seeing anybody. And The Mandalorian dropped. And they introduced this character, Ahsoka, who I had no idea who she was. And I went online and saw a lot of people freaking out over the introduction of this character, and then went very far into the lore of Star Wars and have been ranting about the Jewish parallels pretty much since the first season, along with a lot of other people on this panel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just to get us started, I want to talk about what was your first kind of inkling that the Mandalorian had Jewish DNA, as you might say. I mean, that's a controversial phrase, but had Jewishness in its ethos. Jenn, why don't we start with you?
Very early on, as soon as I heard Din Djarin, as we didn't even know he was just yet, talking about the fact that Mandalorians were a people and a religion, and that they were exiled from their homeland. And why does he still believe in these things, even if it's not in practice anymore and they've been scattered to the winds? I was like, that sounds really familiar. So right from the get-go, I think it's inherent in the bones of the show.
Nice. And how about you, Akiva?
I think there's a lot of different, sci-fi populations that have been exiled from their home world and stuff like that. I think the thing that really hit for me was the not being able to take the helmet off. Sorry if I'm stealing anybody else's answer. Because, I think as an Orthodox Jew, I think a lot of me and a lot of my fellow Orthodox Jews have had this experience of like, hey, why can't you take that off? And like, no, but there are other ones. There are other Jews. Why can't you take what makes you different? Like, and then, seeing a character who wasn't portrayed as bad or like backwards for following their religious things, and also to the point that like we implicitly understood aspects of the show that other people were struggling with, like why does Bo-Katan's click, for lack of a better term, not wear the helmet, and they do, like, oh well, we implicitly understand like how different responses to the trauma of exile could have different ramifications for different groups. Like, duh. Yeah. So like a show that was not just shared aspects with my culture, but was actually understood better within the context of my own culture is, my reaction to The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point and something I want to come back around to later. Alex, what was your kind of first inkling reaction?
I don't know that I had like a first reaction so much as the first season was going, it just like all of this started hitting at once of they're exiled. They have the funny headgear. By the way, they're maligned for aggressive business practices as they're trying to eke out a living being persecuted. That's an interesting and very specific kind of one that you don't have for a lot of different cultures. That there is this huge emphasis placed on children in their culture, and the emphasis on this responsibility that you have to your children and imparting the culture to the children. Of a lot of these themes just feel very familiar throughout, and it ends, if I recall correctly, the first season ends with wherever they were hiding from, them being driven out of there. Like that is a Jewish experience that Jews for millennia could relate to and immediately understand. And them just trying to figure out where's the next place to be going. So
yeah, definitely. Tamar, wrap us up.
I don't really have anything that other people didn't say particularly, but the thing about educating children was something that really stuck with me. Like the whole point of the show is essentially like, oh, this is not, how old was he? 50 or 80? Like they were like, this is an old man I have to kill, and now it's a child, and no, I have to educate it. Like first of all, like saving a life, but also educating children is like what Judaism is like, well, at least Pesach is based on. But like there are obligations of parents to children to educate them, and if not the parent, then the community. So it felt really like, oh, this is space juice for so many levels, but this is very Jewy.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to say we have 52 viewers, so that's really cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to kind of kick off the kind of modern practice segment of our discussion by kind of focusing on the helmet and using that kind of as a jumping off point. So Akiva, can you get us started with a couple more of your thoughts on kind of similarities to Jewish practice and, as you say, kind of like the socio-religious kind of realities, I guess, of wearing a helmet or wearing something for religious purposes?
Yeah, I think that here's how I'll put it. Not a lot of communities, religious communities in America have something that makes them immediately identifiable. Us and Muslims, and there's probably more that I'm grievously offended by excluding right now, but there's not a lot of religious identification that is immediately obvious and also part of like a set of restrictions that create inconvenience. And seeing that on screen where like it was clear that the inability to take the helmet off created problems that weren't just like, okay, whenever I encounter the first sign of trouble, I'm just going to take the helmet off, right? The episode with Bill Burr, and he has to change into the stormtrooper outfit, and instead of going, oh, okay, so I don't have to because it's pikuach nefesh or whatever, I have to wear the stormtrooper outfit. He's like, no, I'm going to change away from everybody else so they don't see my face, right? That was very recognizable to us, Orthodox Jews, as people who have to occasionally like go to like second order accommodations, or like the bidi eved situations is the word that I'm looking for, and to see that was something that was important to the character, and like more importantly, it was not something that the main character's journey was specifically to overcome. And you see this a lot with a lot of the commentary on The Mandalorian, I've noticed, is like, well, when is he going to get over the helmet thing? And like that, you're missing the point, guys. He's not getting, that's important to him. He's not getting over the helmet thing, right? And there's this very sort of, I don't know, Western Christian assumption that like the way that this character grows is by assimilating into the larger culture. That, as soon as they are able to come to terms with the fact that they're a religious crazy person and they're different than everybody else, and the less that they separate themselves from everybody else, the better off they'll be. When they take off the helmet and everybody can see them, then they've clearly healed from their trauma. And it was just refreshing to see a show that was not making that assumption, that was going like, yeah, this, it's important to him. He's not taking it off. And even when he does take it off, it adds to the drama of the scene that he's willing to, just this once, not like, now that I've taken the helmet off to see Grogu with my own eyes, now it doesn't mean anything to me anymore. No, it means something because of how big it is for him to take it off. And it relates to what I think is a larger theme in American society right now, where we're seeing religion as something, maybe not religion per se, but like individual identities, as something that are special and unique and worth celebrating, even when they don't fit into the culture. And this is a good thing to exist. Cut me off if I'm like talking too long. I tend to do that.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I do want to get, Tamar or Jen, do you guys have any thoughts on this? Yeah, Tamar.
Sorry, I was hitting spacebar like it was Zoom, and that's not how you unmute. The thing that Akiva touched on about like people think that like Din is gonna, evolve from his trauma. Like first of all, I don't think that's necessarily the point of the show, but also if like, he changes his religious observance throughout or his beliefs, like I think that's a really normal progression of a religious person's life. But also I think it's like people never talk about like his trauma is not to do with becoming a Mandalorian. It's like his trauma was before he was a Mandalorian. So this is really similar to kind of like someone who's like either later in life discovering faith, or someone who is born in, or someone who is maybe adopted into faith or something. So I just feel like that's like a point that like people are not like receptive to. They're just like, oh, clearly he is in a cult and abused by this cult, and he's taught to be a murderous bounty hunter, rather than like, no, he seems pretty chill with his job, and like that's never like anything he's shown any trauma to or anything. And like I do wonder, I don't feel like the end goal of the show is for like Grogu to get his helmet, but I did for like during the finale of this season, I was like, is he gonna get his helmet? Like that was not what I really thought was going on. It was kind of more like, oh, a different generation gets a different spin on their own observances. But I was just sitting there like, oh, there's so much stuff here that like other people, if it goes in a certain direction, people will get so pissed, because like the idea that Grogu may like willingly become a Mandalorian of Din Djarin's observance would be like so antithetical to what most people want from these characters. And I think that's
the entire
like the
fandom is parents whose kid has come home from seminary.
Well, that's like what I think is so interesting about this show is like someone tweeted out on one of Michal's tweets about this, like this is the most like the best representation of like Jewish life and observance ever, because like it's so subtle, but also it's very relatable, even though like most people watching it have no idea. And I think was it Akiva who said it? I think it's so important that like, first of all, none of the Mandalorians necessarily assimilate the way that like we see, like even there's like people who are maybe more Orthodox versus more conservative, or more Orthodox versus modern. I don't know. They still wear the helmets, just at different times and everything. But I think like it's just so interesting that like the show's existence is like, now we're going forward with this. Like this is not changing. We're gonna, revitalize this cultural aspect of ourselves if we can, and we're going to keep to it even when our own people are like, nah, you should stop. Like that's so Jewish. I just love it all. But I do think one thing that we haven't talked about, and then I'll stop talking, is the scene with Bo when she first eats a meal with the Mandalorians, when she's in the cohort, and she's like, what do you mean you guys all like go your own way to eat? Like the idea of not having a communal meal together was very not Jewish in a way, but also I was like, oh, this like idea of like, it reminded me a lot of Tisha B'Av, right before Tisha B'Av, when you're supposed to go off on your own to like get into your remote. I was like, I bet you like if like there is something in the Mandalorian culture that not only are you supposed to unmask on your own, but also you're supposed to spend your own time to reflect on like the way or something. I was just sitting there, I was like, this is somehow still really Jewish, even when it's not so Jewish. And I just really loved that.
Yeah. The helmet point is also just a very interesting one. Of you talk about like these things of there's relatable aspects of Judaism reflected in all of this. Of there are other points in the show where he could take off his helmet and break bread with people, and he doesn't. And like kashrut is not really, or dietary restrictions is not really a thing that they depict in that show. But that kind of, you're engaging with this world, but also as a result of your observance, there are limitations on how you can engage with others, is very subtle, but also immediately recognizable to anybody who's shomer kashrut. That this is there are limitations on how you can be forming relationships outside of the community too. Of it'll be done in other kinds of ways, and they call him, a cult follower, they call him like a religious fanatic, whatever. But over the course of the show, you see very consistently of he's actually very socially intelligent. He is very good at understanding other people's cultures. And I think a lot of that comes from in the same kind of way that Jews do, of when you're constantly a minority, when you're constantly on the outside, you end up developing a different perspective, and you end up coming at people's cultures from a different perspective as well.
Yeah, the dude speaks Tusken Raider.
Yeah.
Like, that has never happened, I think, in Star Wars previously. and he's like the first character that we've seen that hasn't treated Tusken Raiders as like subhuman. I think before like the Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah, but by the
But
way,
also a
that
Mandalorian.
aspect of speaking a bunch of languages too, like I speak 2 languages, but I have older relatives who spoke half a dozen, and like that was like a normal thing for Jews to be doing in a lot of places and times. Just like you have to speak with people, so you learn their language, you familiarize yourself with your culture, you find ways to relate.
Yeah. I just want to turn to Jenn for one sec. I just want to dive in a little bit to the concept of living waters and kind of how you see that, because that was definitely, I don't remember if we heard it first in season 2 or if we heard it in the Book of Boba Fett, but the second they said living waters, I was like, well, okay, now we're just straight up using Jewish terminology because Mayim Chaim, living waters, are what the waters of the mikveh are supposed to be. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Sure. No. So for those who don't know, the idea of Mayim Chaim, or living waters, is that there is a ritual purification process that Jews utilize for everything from the utensils and serveware we used to eat with, to people who are newly converted, to in the cycle of marital life, it's utilized as well. And to hear them say that there was a tshuva process, there was a process of trying to make up for one's sins or what one had done that was not in the way, and utilize Mayim Chaim, utilize living waters in this way, was very Jewish. The whole concept of Yom Kippur, the whole concept of a Day of Atonement, is that it's built in. No matter what, in Judaism, we have a day, no matter what we've done, we atone and we get redeemed, and it's forgiven just as easily as din goes into the waters. I think the idea was, in so many of the seasons leading up to this, it was set up to seem as if he could never get there, because Mandalore, they had all forsaken it. They thought that the surface of the land was too destroyed to get there, that it had been poisoned. There were all these rumors going around as to what they would be able to do, but he still believed in it. He still believed, I have the ability to be redeemed. I believe in my own ability to access this pure part of myself by going through this ritual that's so important to my culture. And it's very much the way we view it in Judaism as well.
Can I just jump on that and
Yeah,
to
please.
the next point, which is something that like is so apparent, I think, subtly, is not only do we never see him, face to face with anyone else, he's never face to face with the camera on his own. It's not like he's in his ship, and removes his helmet, which if you're very strict and very observant, you're never naked. Like, you're never supposed to be with your nakedness in front of God. And that's like an intense interpretation, but that kind of really, I was like, it's not that he's uncomfortable and he's doing this because, he was told to do it. It was something that like he's very comfortable with, and it's his existence. And I just think like that's so subtle. But like, aside from the fact, yeah, of course, like they could have very easily shown us his face in episode 1 if this wasn't all really intentional. Like, because yeah, okay, he could have not had his face shown to the camera, but like could have shown to others, but he could have shown it to the camera or in his own privacy. But we never see that, and I just think that's like so intentional and so subtle that most people wouldn't even think about it. But it's there.
That's a really good point. And I think that also shows the show's respect for him as a character, that it's not that, well, there's this guy who's underneath a mask and, his religion is the mask he wears, but really he's like, this guy whose face we can see and stuff. No, that is the character. That is the person. And like, it's almost like respectful of them to like treat him that way in giving him, you get what I'm saying.
It's almost antithetical to Vader, who like is, of course, the first real mask of Star Wars that everyone really associates, but Boba Fett, like, we know his mask also, but like, and that's where the Mandalorian came from, sort of. But like, the idea that for Anakin, it's a mask is hiding everything, right? But for Din and all the other Mandalorians, it's not hiding. It's I don't know, part of who they are. Yeah, I think it's like so beautiful, and most people don't care or get it.
Like when Din pictures himself, or when he would draw himself, would he draw himself without the mask or with the mask? probably with the mask.
Definitely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point of the show's respect for it. And another thing that I'm not sure that everyone is picking up on, like the scene in season 3 where he finally has gotten to the living waters and goes in reciting his creed. And I just found that there was no, at least I didn't think there was any cynicism. I didn't think there was any kind of, we're in on a joke or anything. I thought it was a very profound moment, and it's a little bit undercut that he gets, sucked under the water after a second. But the action itself, and then following that up with Bo-Katan having her own religious experience and seeing the mythosaur, I thought was really beautiful. Like, just things I had not expected to connect to on a religious level in a TV show.
I didn't think
about
that they
space.
going under actually undercut it. I think it actually really brought it home that it's a deeper commitment than he even knows, that it's all the way down, that it's not just like dipping into a bath and then going out. It's sending the message to the audience that this is a big thing. This is yeah.
I totally thought it was just like a metaphor for like a leap of faith.
Yeah.
Literally.
Awesome. So to segue to just the second part of our kind of like modern practice realities of religious life, I think in social terms, you can kind of view there being sort of two interactions that Mandalorians have, and those are intra-Mandalorian reactions and extra-Mandalorian interactions. For the first, anyone want to get us started about how Mandalorians of different stripes? Alex, please get us started.
It's like my favorite moment in the entire series is the bar scene where you have Bo-Katan, you have Boba Fett, and you have Din in it, and you have 3 different kinds of Mandalorians in there, of somebody who was born into it but never really associated with it in Boba, and somebody who did what was quote unquote the mainstream practice in Bo-Katan, who came up from like the elites of the society and everything else, and then somebody who does the most traditionalist, which he would call a cult version of it, but what anyone else would just call from. That I think it was just like such a fascinating interaction there of like, I refuse to believe that Jews were not involved in the writing of that, because I don't know how else you get to that scene, that you have people who all claim the same label, but it means wildly different things to them. Maybe Boba doesn't claim it, but he does claim the armor from his father. So like there is still a acknowledgement of the heritage there. But that kind of depiction to me is just a very fascinating kind of, she takes off her helmet and he's like, you are not a Mandalorian. And like, that's a Jew encountering someone from a different Jewish community for the first time. And it's a very shocking kind of experience. And her being like, oh, like I've heard of you guys, like, this is like a thing that you do in your community, whatever. Also kind of disrespectfully too, but they find a way to, they end up having like a very good working partnership in the end.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting at the end of that episode, Bo-Katan does say this is the way. And she's a little snarky about it, but she's also kind of like accepting where he is. Yeah. Anyone else? Jen, any thoughts on that? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go to Akiva and then we'll go to Jen.
Yeah, sorry. I do think that that was one of the times where I really felt that my Jewishness contributed an understanding to the show, because at the beginning when he was saying, oh, I don't take off my helmet, people were like, well, we watched the Clone Wars and they took off their helmets all the time. What are you talking about? And us Orthodox Jews were like, no, clearly this is Zecher L'Chorban. And this is we understood implicitly what was going on. And then that was confirmed in show, that there are different groups with different reactions to the destruction of Mandalore. And it was a moment where, as opposed to most other TV shows where you're just waiting for your heart to be broken in their, depiction of your religion, it was like, oh, wow. See, I told you. Yeah. And it was done really well. And they understood how religion responds to these sort of things and how those groups interact with each other. Yeah. Anyway, go to Jen now.
Sure. No, that's well said. Going back to Bo-Katan and sort of her journey, and Michal, you and I have talked about this, offline before. There is such a realistic depiction of what some people's experience is with their own Judaism through her, being born into this elite status, wrestling with it, denying it, feeling disgruntled about the reality of what it looks like when she was a princess. She was Lady Kreese. And then she, through no fault of her own, was exiled from her land and was no longer royalty, was no longer her whole, the temple system, everything that her family protected and stood for was razed to the ground as far as she knew. And I would be, questioning her character very much if she wasn't in doubt of what that meant about her identity when that happened. And to see her sort of almost unwillingly kind of falling in. Okay, she went into living waters to rescue Bando. She went in to rescue Din, and then she comes out, and all of a sudden the armorer is telling her, "Great, you've been redeemed too. Let's all go have a kiddush." And she's just like, "What?" And to see that happen, it felt like, okay, I relate to that a little bit in terms of what my own journey with my Judaism has been, of one day not sort of wanting to understand or agree with the way, and another day realizing, well, you know what, maybe I can do the way my way. And what does that look like?
Yeah.
I did find it interesting that Mandalorians do not think that tefillah requires kavana.
Can you explain that for our...
You don't need intention in order for immersing in the living waters to work. It's just, okay, yeah, that was one line. Go on to the next person.
I think depending on how they relay Bo-Katan's story further in the show, it'll be really interesting. Like, does she decide to become more strict, like how she was really into the armorer's perspective, and she got inspiration from it. So is she gonna go back to that route now that like she's gotten the way forward, or is her way going to be like she will be the middle ground who bridges the two? Because I can't imagine that all the sides of Mandalorians that we've seen in this season like will still stay friends in other seasons.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. And also, this is just me projecting, but I'm curious if we will yet again see Mandalorians self-destruct. Like, is this really like going to be that far of a metaphor that like, oh, you take 2 steps forward and then fighting messes things up for you guys? So I'm really curious, but TBD,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, Bo-Katan to me is the most interesting Mandalorian. Of her arc here is like she started off as an extremist. She was part of Death Watch in the Clone Wars series, which I was rewatching those episodes today, so it's all very fresh right now. But she was an extremist who rejected her sister's path of, we're rejecting the martial culture, we're going to be a peaceful, non-aligned kind of society. She was an extremist who said, no, there is the traditions of the Mandalorian people. Those are, the martial traditions of the people. And she fought for it. And then when they were overrun when she felt that they went too far, she walked away from it. But we're encountering her, seeing now with a stream of the Death Watch, right? The armor never explicitly says she's not Death Watch during all of this. That she's coming back to it as an adult with a lot more maturity, with a lot more experience, and engaging with it in a very different kind of way than she did as a teenager, where she just agreed with everything that they were doing and was on board until it was overwhelming for her. Like, that's a very mature depiction of religious engagement for adults, and one that I personally relate to very much.
Yeah, something that I think has been really strong also about Bo-Katan is her kind of coming to this idea that Mandalorians are their own worst enemy. She says, enough Mandalorian blood has been spilled by our own hands. She includes herself in that. And I think that brings to me really strongly of the concept of Sinat Chinam, which is baseless hatred. Well, probably get to that in a bit, just
I was
about
screaming at the
parallels.
screen when she said those lines.
Yeah, and it's really accurate, right? And it's something that, like, I'm sure that there are other groups that have this concept as well, but it is something that is extremely strongly present through Jewish theology, philosophy, and the very real interactions that Jews of different stripes have with each other today. So to just quickly touch on extra Mandalorian interactions, my favorite episode of the show, I think, is the episode called The Believer, which is where Din has to take off his helmet, and he goes with Migs Mayfield, who is played by Bill Burr, and they go into the Imperial base, and Migs gives him like a lot of garbage about his observance. He has this whole like, well, it doesn't make sense. Can you not take it off? Can you take it off, but you have to wear something? Like, which one is it? Because they're different. And it's like, I feel very much like I've had that conversation with people who are like, okay, but is it kosher if it's vegan and it doesn't have the symbol? And it's like, well, yeah, some people would eat that, but I'm not. And wherever you are, everybody like has a reasoning for their behavior that I think is very present. I guess that sense of assault on your reasoning was very present for me. Like, just to quote Migs for a second, he says, "I don't know how you people wear those things. And by you people, I do mean Mandalorians." It's like, again, very, very on Front Street with this concept. The other side of that would be, I think, Moff Gideon, who is kind of a Mandalorian cosplayer, thinks he's the best of the Mandalorians, even though he is not one. There are definitely things that I think you could see parallels there to interactions with other faiths. Yeah, Akiva, what would you have to say about this?
Yeah, so I was just watching this the last episode because I goofed and didn't watch the last three right before the panels, so I had to watch it. Whatever. What struck me about Moff Gideon there was each nation has its own thing, and I will take the best of each. In other words, there's no particularism in his worldview. There's, everything has to be taken for, the empire, or like me, the Moff Gideon representing like, the army that will restore order to the galaxy. Right? Like particularism and coming from like a particular people is a weakness to Moff Gideon. And it needs the abilities of the Mandalorians and the Jedis and all those different people need to be liberated, so to speak, in Moff Gideon's worldview. And I think like part of the, for lack of a better term, the ethos of the show, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I pronounce it the same way it was in Big Lebowski, so I think I'm on good, solid terms. Is that no, the particulars that you belong to are important and cannot be isolated and just used for other people's purposes. That like he is Mandalorian, and that's not transferable to just somebody who wants to take what's good about Mandalorians and like put it to his own whatever. I'm talking around in circles. Somebody else.
Oh, can I add to that? Because I really love that point of the when he was going in, he was saying like, I will take the best from the Jedi and I will take the best from the Mandalorian. Of Michal, I know you have thoughts on this and I think you should add to it. I don't want to steal from that particular one, but the part of it that very much stood out to me is A, he's alone when he's doing all of this. There's not a community that comes with it. And B, what does he have that is his own? There isn't anything there. Like all he offers is to be taking from others so that he can rule, so that he can dominate. There's no community, there is no love, there is no rootedness that comes with any of this. It is everything belongs to me, which is just such a kind of a sad way to go through life. That the Mandalorians in that scene offer a contrast of Mandalorians are stronger together, that they understand how to use these tools, that these tools have their cultural and religious significance that make them better wielders of them.
Also, just to jump off that, and then Michal should speak, because I know, like you said, she has a lot. The only community he wanted was himself. like
Very true. Yeah, literally.
like his clones. He was just like everybody
The
else.
only thing he's
who
been
works
upset
with him,
about. Yeah, so true.
Just the death troopers that he's made in his own image. That's
Yeah,
it.
just wanted like table full of himself, just like
Yeah.
that scene where he has the meeting with all the generals. He just wanted that, but with a bunch of Moff Gideons. Yeah. Anyway,
And I think there's something also about like kind of a subtle exterminationism, as far as Gideon goes. Like he isn't as he's not explicitly like, I'm gonna wipe you all out, although he certainly is fine, killing many Mandalorians.
pretty sure he does.
Is he? I watched the
pretty
finale,
explicit,
all of
like,
that.
he says,
Yeah.
something like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Even better. So yeah, I mean, I think you can view that in in a lot of different ways. It did strike me with love and respect to our Christian listeners, the doctrine of Christian supersessionism over Judaism, that idea of like taking things that are of one faith and kind of ours but better. I apologize if I'm flattening that in any way, but it is kind of the Jewish perspective on it. And I see people talking about this a lot online, that like that isn't necessarily an exterminationist philosophy, and I think at its heart it really kind of is. And you see Gideon kind of acting in that way. I don't know if this is intentional. There are some things in the show where I'm like, definitely this is intentional. I'm less certain about Gideon, but when he said that you are a talented people whose time has ended, that just rang a lot of bells for me.
No, for sure. And I think to kind of bring that back to what, saying Moff Gideon is in it for himself, that his whole vision is his domination, as opposed to the Mandalorians, who, yes, in some ways they're mercenaries, but in others, they're there to help whoever needs help. The people throughout the universe, throughout the galaxy, that don't have anybody to stand up for them. They're really there to lend a hand, to the point that they're getting offered towns and a city of refuge as a thank you for defending people of Navarro from these threats that are happening. And almost every episode of the second season was, who are the people we're helping today? Okay, it's Fish Lady and her babies. Okay, it's whatever it is. And every day it was, here's Mando to the rescue for this
Series
next
starts with it. He has a duty to return the child to his parents. That's how the whole series starts. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on now to the history section, the Jewish history section of our discussion. And just to kind of start broadly, before we do, I want to mention, going right way back to the Bible, we have to shout out the reference to Bamidbar, or the Book of Numbers. I'm not fully up on the numbers. There you go. And the story of the spies who come into the land of Israel and scope it out, give a report to the rest of the Jewish people. Story does not go quite the same way as it does in The Mandalorian. However, you can definitely see parallels there. And the reason why I love it is because in retrospect, it was pretty clearly the reference that they were making. But there was a lot of online discussion about whether or not there was another spy, because of the plural. And I felt very in on the joke early on about, no, spies means just like the Bible, guys, obviously.
Yeah.
So moving a couple of 100 years later in history, someone want to start us off talking about historical factionalism in The Mandalorian as we see it?
I thought you were gonna say in Judaism. I was gonna be like,
Let's go.
it led to everything bad that ever happened to Jews was because we couldn't get along.
Part 1 of 567.
Yeah, right.
Just go read Josephus and get back to us.
Literally, in Judaism, the teaching that the Second Temple was destroyed was because of Jews hating one another.
Yeah,
that's
I do
that's
think
the only thing.
I do think that this Second Temple era serves as I haven't watched a Clone Wars, to be honest, but like the idea of the Death Watch being like like the Sicarii seems to match up pretty well.
What's a Sicarii? I
The
feel really dumb right now.
It's the guys who
don't
are
worry.
Yeah.
The zealots, the people who Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had to get past in order to negotiate with the emperor, right? Those guys who would burn down food stores in order to get the people to fight, stuff like that. Somebody who has seen the Clone Wars should take over here.
There is a lot of depictions of this, and then pretty explicit in the Clone Wars too, of like the destruction of Mandalore was very much due to infighting. Of the Empire entered into influence there pretty much very strongly in parallel to the late Roman Republic engaging with Judea during that time period. Of there was infighting on the side of the Republic that led them to try to seek allies elsewhere, and there was infighting in Judea that high priests who were competing, different factions, everything else, who were reaching out for influence from the outside. In the Clone Wars series, you see this come to a head with Darth Maul, who you see in the prequel films. Actually, surprised he's alive and plays a pretty prominent role in Clone Wars and Rebels, and is a very tragic figure ultimately. But in towards the end of Clone Wars, he ends up taking over Mandalore, taking advantage of their religious customs to rule over the planet, and Bo-Katan appeals to the Republic for additional forces so that she can overthrow him. And then that is the events right before the destruction of Mandalore under what became the Empire. That I think that there's very interesting parallels there, and like these ideas of the Jews were infighting, and it led to this tragic destruction and everything. In the last episode of the latest season, spoiler alert, they're lighting the Great Forge, and there's immediate parallels to that in Jewish history too. Of you have to rededicate the temple somehow, and like that's just the way that it goes, and like the significance of different factions either fighting or coming together to be doing things. Of the parallels are just so strong to different points of Jewish history. Of you can go with the Sicarii, but I also had modern kinds of parallels to it too, where you have in the Zionist movement you have like the mainstream kinds of groups like the Haganah, you have the right-wing group, the Irgun, but then you also have breakaway factions from that are even more extreme, of like the Stern Gang, which was doing crazy things. We're not going to go into the full depths of it here, but the idea of like you have like these extremist kinds of factions who are willing to go to any lengths that the ends always justify the means to do whatever they want, even if it's quote unquote for the people, but they're actively harming the people in the process. Of just such interesting parallels to be made.
Yeah, definitely. I do really, I like the idea of the Great Forge as, whichever part of the temple you kind of want to view it as, whether it's the temple itself or the menorah, Alex, you mentioned, or the Mizbeach, the altar where sacrifices were made. And I think that carries through really well in another kind of like modern sort of parallel in, the armorer speaks about there being one Great Forge, and then as they were dispersed, they had to, make their own little forges, and they were all still the same forge.
I think it has to be a direct correlation to the menorah, only because they, like, at least the Mandalorians that we know, like the armorer has her own forge. It's like when you go to a synagogue, there's always the flame above the where the Torahs are kept. So like I think like it has to be. I feel like it's that. Like it has to be like, I don't know.
Like for so many of these things, there's like, one of you went to Jewish day school. Just raise your hand, guys. Like, like for the writing staff of the Mandalorian, like just tell us which one of you went to Jewish day school.
Has nobody interviewed them about this yet? Like, has anyone?
I have not seen it anywhere, but I do want to point out on this of like who are the Jews who are involved with this. going back and rewatching on the Clone Wars series, everything we learned that in Clone Wars that is central to the religion and the culture later on in Clone Wars, in Rebels, and in Mandalorian was introduced by a character that Jon Favreau voiced in the episode where they start introducing it. And he's like the recurring theme there. Like the Darksaber is introduced by him. All of these customs, like the references to like the Great Mandalore, all of that stuff of like Moshiach and who unites the people and brings them back and redeems them in the land. Everything straight from Favreau's character.
Can we discuss the Darksaber, because like the sect that we are most familiar with does not care about the Darksaber, and I just think, and now in this latest episode, the Darksaber is destroyed. So like the whole idea of what the Darksaber is and what it means, like Mashiach, Messiah, like I just think it's so fascinating, and I don't know, but like, are we done with it? Like,
it is kind of weird that like there's this big important thing to the history of Mandalore, and our Mando Din Djarin is like, what, this? You need this? I think you make a good point that like the show sort of decides like him that this was not important for the destiny of Mandalore. Yeah.
I think it also was not important to him because he's personally not interested in ruling, right? Like he was pretty ready to give it away at every opportunity. That's not the path that he wishes to walk.
All he wants to do is sit on his porch.
He wants to raise his kid. He's a good dad.
To be there with his vine and fig tree and live in peace.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Yeah,
exactly.
He literally beat the sword into, well, not a plowshare, but a scrap of metal.
That was it. It also goes back to the theme that they can easily pick up on next season of being Mandalorian was never about the gear. It's about what's in your heart. It's about walking the way, which we can make the parallels obvious too. Everybody in history that was in the death camps didn't have access to tefillin or to matzah and made do with what they could to try to serve Hashem the best way that they could with limited resources. It's about walking the way and not about the.
Yeah, when he says, when Gideon says that Mandalorians are like so pathetic or so weak without their toys or something, that to me felt very much like a kind of, you strip away all of the accoutrements of Judaism, and at the heart of it, you still have a Jew, and you still have someone who is capable of acting as a Jew. To move a little bit quickly to the elements of destruction and exile and diaspora that we see kind of in the historical portion. There's a lot there, but for me, it stood out really strongly when Bo and Din were walking through kind of the literal ruins of their civilization in, I think, the second episode of the third season, and it really felt like that they were in a process of almost mourning, and seeing what had been. Anyone want to kind of take that?
I can.
Go for it.
Them walking through the ruins, like my personal reaction to it is, if you've ever been to the Kotel, you walk around to the other side to the City of David exhibit and everything. There are literal ruins. Like these stones are still just tumbled over from that kind of time period, or at least that's the way it's described, right? I'm not a professional historian, but the experience of going there and believing these things of like, it's gone, it's all gone away and there's nothing here, and then you come back and like, actually there is quite a bit that is still here, and it is very meaningful to the survivors. You also have like these kinds of things of after the Bar Kokhba revolts, after the destruction of the temple and after the Bar Kokhba revolts, you have Jewish communities that are no longer in Jerusalem because like they're banned from the city by the Romans and everything, so they set up north in the Galilee, in the periphery of Jerusalem. They're not there, but they're close enough, right? And you have these depictions in the Mandalorian series of, I wasn't on Mandalore during the destruction, I was on one of the moons. Of like, they're nearby, they're still orbiting around the center of where their faith and their culture is, but because of the empire, that they are removed from it. And there's a traumatizing kind of experience and a different kind of culture that evolves in response to those kinds of circumstances of like, this is the Jewish experience in the post-temple period.
Also, like, I feel like it has to be a direct inspiration from, I didn't phrase that right, but I feel like the first temple, because like they went back within living memory, and this whole thing, like even though it looks like the planet was destroyed ages and ages ago and like is an archaeological find, like it's within living memory of these people's lives. Like Bo-Katan is, you know, a main player in that. So I just think that a lot of that is like, how do you go back and pick up something that was destroyed in your lifetime is very Jewish, but like, and how do you move forward from that? And I just think that's going to be real interesting to see moving forward.
It's the fun question of where in the Jewish time period are we? And I strongly suspect that we are leading up to Bar Kokhba.
I mean, I have to admit, until like a half hour before this panel, I didn't actually Google how many seasons are left of this show. And I really thought like this was the last one leading up to the movie. So I was like really happy with Din just being on his porch and like doing his thing. And now I'm like, oh, we're gonna see disaster. Like disaster is gonna have to happen.
Are we gonna maybe get a Ketos war? Or or like massive amounts of Mandalorians throughout like the galaxy start declaring war on the entire empire and being surprisingly successful. Jewish people, if you've never heard of the Ketos War, go Google it. We like almost won. It was pretty crazy. Yeah.
Is that the Cyprus Alexandria?
We almost won. It was great.
We almost look for all
Getting
the
that on a
stuff
t-shirt.
that
There's a lot of those.
But we did
gave them a
not.
hell of a fight.
What is the Hanukkah story?
We gave them all we could got. All they could get. It's pretty impressive historically, actually. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I do want to focus a little bit more on Bo-Katan and what this might mean for, you know, the future of the series of her character. We discussed this in our kind of pre-discussion, and it's not clear where Bo-Katan's name comes from exactly, but it's hard to ignore the kind of Bo-Katan Bar Kokhba parallels, especially when, you know, you have Mandalorians who have been on Mandalore going up to her and telling her, we knew you would return, we were waiting for you. You know, it has very strong Messiah vibes, and you know, someone wants to take that as a starting point.
But isn't she sort of a not entirely, but she's almost sort of a false one, because it turns out, first of all, the thing that marks her as a Messiah doesn't end up really being the marker of her. Like the Darksaber is gone. And yeah, it came back, but it wasn't solely because of her leadership. Like she's not necessarily the hero of the story, right? Like it's Grogu. So I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about that. I feel like that might be setting us up again for like what you're saying, like kind of a dramatic Bar Kokhba like situation against the Empire, and Bar Kokhba, depending on your perspective, led them the wrong way, right? So ultimately leading, you know, to good moments, but also not so great ones ultimately. So I think like there could be a lot here from her moving forward.
Yeah. So in the Mandalorian lore, of like they're called Mandalorians because they are the children of Mandalore, who was a person, you know, B'nai Israel, fun little parallels. But the last great Mandalore was the person who wielded the Darksaber, because he was trained by the Jedi and then returned to unite the Mandalorians, unite all the tribes, and rule over the land. And the person who has the strongest parallel to that story to be the rightful, you know, Mashiach of their era, is Grogu, who was trained by the trained by the Jedi, and now is with the Mandalorians and training in their ways too. And like you can have the parallel there of Bo-Katan is the leader right now, but by what their religion describes as the, you know, proper return of the great Mandalore, she doesn't check off all the boxes in much the same way that Bar Kokhba didn't.
I wonder if like we're looking at the wrong era, and because the Return from the Second Temple era is obviously more forefront in people's minds. And I wonder if there are residents of Mandalore currently that, settled there after the Imperial destruction of Mandalore and and that'll, lead to some friction in future seasons. Like, that's where I thought things were headed.
They made the desert bloom.
Yeah, I kind of don't want it to head that way because the internet will be like nigh unlivable if it goes that way.
For a change.
But that would be interesting.
Shocking.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, I think one of the things, not necessarily Jewish things, but one of the things the show does well is like set up something that we think is going to happen in like a terrible way, because we're all just set up. We're like, we've all been we've watched too many Game of Thrones episodes or something. Like, we are expecting the worst of these characters. So like, yeah, of course, these people who, were hidden forever are going to backstab them. There's going to be a spy there. The armorer is going to betray them all. Like, Bo-Katan is going to end up being the worst and self-destructing or something. Like, we're set up for that way. But like, maybe people who just like stayed on their planet and grew grass are just like nice people. Like, I don't know. That'd be like a nice change. Wouldn't make, I think Jon Favreau said he wanted 10 seasons in his mind. So I don't know if we're going to get 10 seasons out of like, people being nice. So.
I mean, I will say, I think a lot of the drama anyway of The Mandalorian has mostly been in the past. It's a story that is reacting to a lot of events, and I feel like the reclamation of Mandalore and the, I thought very moving scene of them relighting the forge, was kind of the biggest top level Star Wars event that has happened. Even the confrontation with Gideon is almost more on a, national level as opposed to a personal level. But yeah, I mean, I do just want to touch on about, it being sort of difficult to pin down exactly which era we're talking about. I kind of tend to think that's the point. There are kind of too many, I think, things to compare it to. You really can go all the way back to the Bible, and you can, look at the Night of 1,000 Tears, which was the night of destruction on Mandalore, that instantly recalls Kristallnacht, and obviously, the origin point of villains in Star Wars is the Third Reich and the Nazis. So I think I feel like we shouldn't necessarily be looking for what it is definitionally and more kind of what it evokes. And I think what it evokes is just the general experience of Jewish history with some more specific parallels thrown in.
Yeah, unrelated to like all this, I'm so curious if anybody else is watching this show of any other different cultures and like, this is my thing. And it's not just like us doing it because we know, his background, and we know like there are Jews in the room. Like, I'm so curious if other people are finding parallels.
So I was watching a lot of the YouTube reactions after the season finale this morning, and from a bunch of white guys who were really into Star Wars, like all of that flew over their head. Like a lot of complaining of like, why was it called The Spies? There were no spies. Like, what is going on? And meanwhile, in that episode, you have people like volunteering for it. They see literal giants and monsters as they are on Mandalore, and just like they're beating you over the head with this. That I think is just kind
it's
of
a land that devours its inhabitants.
Like, finally, something for us.
This is like the red panda so the turning red reaction all over again. Like, people don't have any awareness that like maybe not all media is created just from their perspective.
Yeah. I think I think Michal, you're correct that like it not being pin downable to a certain era is part of the point. That like, yeah, it's evoking a general sense of what Jewish history is, and this cycle of like destruction and rebirth and like return, like, and all those themes of maintaining your identity in exile, stuff like that. Like, I think you're onto something. That like all the discussions about the specific times are a little bit besides the point. Oh, well, Tamar, what were you saying? Sorry. I wanted to respond to Michal and then Tamar.
I don't remember anymore. We were just discussing
Okay.
in the chat how many questions we're going to answer from the audience.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, we could answer questions.
Yeah, I guess the one last thing I'd like to touch on, and again, there is so much to talk about here, like in as much as like I don't think any one parallel is definitional. I think they are really important. But I think one of the things that has stood out to us, and we referenced this earlier, is kind of this idea of representation in where you would least expect it. Like I've had these conversations about representation for years in media, and Star Wars was one area where I never ever even thought to ask or consider that Jews might be represented because it's Star Wars. Like you can ask for like modern races to be represented in Star Wars, but a faith that how do you do that? And then suddenly they've done it.
Well,
So
I want to interrupt you because I feel like it's so obvious in retrospect. Because, like, as some who mentioned it before, like the whole thing started out of inspiration from like the Third Reich. So for there to be Jewish representation somewhere in the story, it's like almost offensive that it's taken this long.
Yeah, we'll start to hear things about how, like, the Mandalorian banking guilds controlled the and backstabbed the separatists, or like the Galactic Empire, or though I think the Jedi
Well,
sort of played
Beskar
that role in the
is
original thing,
Right.
but
And
yeah.
we already had Watto, like
Yes, Watto. I was going to say,
Super
like,
sad.
in terms of Jewish representation, between this and the Ferengi, this is much better.
But also very committed to their book and their practice.
Yeah, but some other things. Yeah.
So I guess just quickly, do you guys have any thoughts on representation in speculative fiction for Jews or Jew-like people? Because this is kind of the most fascinating takeaway for me from this experience.
If Brandon Sanderson could do it, I think we can do it. So I'm like totally fine with this.
Yeah, and Wired tells me he's a bad writer, so good times.
Sorry, that piece was so much going on in that piece. As
I
a
think
writer,
that piece
I
was
could
very
not believe it.
successful in conveying to the audience that the writer was a jerk.
I'm so sorry. Like, as a writer, reading that piece was just so hilarious, and like I feel bad for the writer and whoever, whichever editor let him publish that. Yeah.
The one thing I will say on like representation here of it is so delightful, Michal, exactly as you said, because it's so unexpected. I think like a popular refrain these days of like there's limits to representation in media, and like representation is not the be all end all. That a lot of the times you're masking other kinds of problematic things by like waving this shiny thing in front of you, like, look, it's representation, whatever, and it makes it superficial. And you encounter like a lot of stories and a lot of depictions now where like it very much feels like someone's just like checking off the box of, I don't want to get yelled on Twitter about this, so like let's just throw this thing in here. And like it's not a fully developed character and everything else of, as we've talked about here with Mando and his relationship to his ethno-religion of, it's incidental to the story. It's not the main focus of it. It's just the thing that he happens to be, which is a lot more sincere and makes him a much more complex kind of character. So what I like the most about this is that it is representation that is not trying to get like a pat on the back for doing like a good job of checking off boxes. It is representation where they're sincerely engaging with the character and thinking through of what would this character, given what we know about them, do in this new scenario that we're putting them in. And it, for Mando at least, or Din Djarin, it's weird that we call him Mando when there's a bunch of them that are Mandalorians, but
when Greef Karga is walking into literally a field of Mandalorians and going, Mando! Like, dude, you must be more specific.
Yeah.
Jen's back.
But yeah, like the thing I love the most about that is just like they keep it very true to the character while doing a very good job of doing representation in a way of all of us found ways that the show resonated with us on our own, right? I just really appreciated that. There are things I can critique about the writing, but that one I very much appreciate.
Yeah, I'll say that, growing up an Orthodox Jew, I had no expectations of representation. Absolutely. Like when I saw, articles about like, do you see yourself represented on TV? I was like, imagine having the privilege to even think that you'd be represented on TV. Like I had been frustrated way too often by not finding my name among the, license plates that you get at like those souvenir stores. I learned my lesson early on, and that's why I think I became such like a close reader of media, is to sort of, in order to find myself in stories, I had to really think about, you know, what this character was, and then fit myself in, and then to even this is sort of reading itself in, because this is not a guy who's like wearing tefillin and stuff like that. This is a space sort of parallel to our experiences as a people, but it's nice to have something that like, oh yeah, I get that. That's something that rings true to my experience in a way that I haven't seen before. And maybe, if this is so successful, maybe, we could have shows about Orthodox Jews in ways that are not just like, and then they became normal.
Don't worry, we
Yeah.
have Jewish Matchmaker coming to Netflix
Oh,
soon, and
great.
it's going to be wonderful.
That'll solve
It's so
anti-Semitism.
You want to know what it's really like to be a Jew? Watch Star Wars.
Look, after Kanye watched Jonah Hill, he's gonna watch Jewish Matchmaker, and like then he's gonna convert. I don't know where that joke went. I'm sorry. I apologize to everybody.
All good, all good. I think we are running short on time, but I do just want to pose one question. We got a ton of great questions from people who RSVP'd. So really, thank you so much for all of that. Also, if you're interested in us continuing this discussion in another panel or something like that, do let us know. It's not something we're planning right now, but it's possible. But the one I just want to go around and ask is, how is Baby Yoda / Grogu like Baby Moses?
He has a basket. It's with him all the time.
He does. He's also rescued.
No, seriously, I taught beginning of Sefer Shemos while the Mandalorian was coming out, and like it hit me as I was teaching it that the same way that the camera sort of like goes to the basket, and then you see like the eyes and ears, right? If you look at the pasuk that describes the Bat Paro finding the baby, like the same sort of camera work in the pasuk sort of happens, where you have she saw a basket, and then Vinay Nar Boched, like there's a baby in it and the baby's crying, right? It's sort of like in stages you see the thing happening. So it's the parallel works. Like the same thing is happening where somebody is about to like get rid of this thing and then realizes that there's a baby inside. I know that may be obvious, but whatever. It
Also,
hit me like while I was teaching it. Yeah.
He's safe from a literal bloodbath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He also has trouble speaking, which is the thing that is associated there, right? There's also he's very reluctant to be in all the situations he finds himself in, to be doing, things that are taking action on behalf of a larger group. He's always, in the background and like, I don't really want to do this, and then having to be like, I'm going to need you to step up here, bud, kind of relationship. Also, if you assume that he may be the most eligible Mandalorian here, there's your parallel to Moshe.
Yeah, future leader.
Right.
Does
He also
IG-11
Jedi as well as with Mandalorians. So
My wife sent me an all caps text also. They did a chord progression directly from the Prince of Egypt movie for Grogu in the last episode. So
interesting.
All caps text.
Jen, were you going to say something? Because I have one point, but I want to make sure you said what you were going to say.
No, I'm good. That was my whole point. Is just the fact that he grew up with the Jedi as well, and had insight into that culture. And he is now a wielder of magic and can do these great acts that will help him bring everybody together. You see that a little bit, when there's a fight that breaks out over the Star Wars' chess game. I'm sorry for not knowing the exact name of that Dejar type game in Star Wars land. But him pushing the no button on his IG, he's being quite literally.
Is IG Aaron, and it's his interpreter?
Oh dear.
I was going to say
Interesting.
one more point that I feel like underrated is he's really old, and so was Moshe when he first encountered the burning bush. Like he didn't speak to Paro until he was well into what we would consider old, like his elder stage of life. So I don't know. I feel like we also keep on underestimating how old Grogu is, but he's still a child.
He's like
A
a
child.
but in
He
his
needs to stay
species,
cute
they-
forever. I don't care how old he gets.
Yeah.
When he gets like old and garbled like Yoda, Michal's gonna be just like
Yoda's
a little
adorable.
baby.
Yoda's cute, right? Nobody
always scared me
agrees
as a
with me that Yoda's cute.
It was creepy.
When 900 years old you will need cold cream at night as well.
All right. I think that's a good
That should be a
note.
commercial.
Yeah, I mean, what gets the wrinkles out of felt? That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
All right, so I just want to ask everyone kind of where people can find you on the internet if people want to bother you for more questions. Tamar, let's start with you.
Hi, you can find me at my website, tamarherman.com, or on Twitter and Instagram at Tamar Writes, like a writer, because I am a writer. I also run the Notes on K-pop Substack, and I recently started Tamar Talks on TikTok, spelled like TikTok's talk, not, talking, which I update about K-pop business news. So if you're interested in that, feel free to follow me there. And thank you, Michal, so much for organizing this. I know you really wanted to do this. You made it happen.
I did. Who knew? Akiva, how about you?
I am Misfit Torah on all platforms that I'm on. If you look at a platform and I'm not Misfit Torah on there, then I'm not on there. I have a Substack. I have Twitter. I have I have an Instagram, but I never use it. So just the Substack and the Twitter. And my Substack has Parsha posts and occasional writing. Yeah, that's where you can find me, unless you're in Memphis, in which case not going to give you my address. All right.
Jenn, how about you?
I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. I think that is the thing these days, as Jennifer Sarah Lev on both platforms, and look forward to hearing from you, whether it's Star Wars theories or story ideas or anything else you want to discuss.
And Alex.
You can find me in the pages of the Forward online or on Twitter at Jewish WONK Wonk. And I just want to say a big thank you to Michal. This would not have come together. This was entirely her initiative. She did really great work with it. She did really great prep work and nudging us all along into this during Pesach. No small feat here. And so very grateful for that. And if there are any Jewish organizations or Jewish publications that would like to partner, this would probably be a good opportunity to reach out to her. Okay.
Definitely. Yeah, that would be amazing. And thank you so much. I'm really thrilled that we were able to do this. You can find me on Twitter at inkasrain, INKASASRAIN. And I hope you'll look up everyone here. Again, do let us know if you'd like to continue this discussion. Thank you for everyone who commented in the chat. You have some really smart things to say. Sorry we didn't get to them, but excellent, especially Beskar Mitzvah. Perfect. And I think that'll do it for us for now. So this is the way, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michal.